I still remember one and only Onyame Jesus, an Hollywood actor and their top content creator. Don't forget.
Imagine waking up in your own village only to find strangers armed with AK-47s grazing cattle on your land, daring you to resist. Imagine farmers too afraid to enter their ancestral farmlands, mothers mourning loved ones killed in cold blood, and children forced out of school because their families can no longer farm. This is not a distant story. It is happening right now in Enugu state. And in a desperate move for survival, Enugu has just launched a new Forest Guard security outfit, a bold stand against the terror of Fulani herdsmen who have turned peaceful communities into war zones. But here's the shocking part. While villagers are being slaughtered and displaced, government forces are accused of targeting the very people they should protect, leaving many to believe that the Igbo are trapped between two enemies, armed herdsmen on one side and state repression on the other. Is this new Forest Guard the long-awaited solution? Or will it end up as another failed promise, another chapter in Nigeria's painful history of broken trust? This is more than a security story. It is about survival, dignity, and the fight for freedom. Stay with me, because what is unfolding in Enugu could change the future of Nigeria forever. Enugu State has launched a new Forest Guard security outfit to tackle violent attacks by Fulani herdsmen who have been terrorizing farming communities. The state's geographical location bordering Kogi and Benue makes it vulnerable to infiltration by Fulani herdsmen. Residents in rural areas, especially farmers, fear going to their farms due to repeated killings and attacks. Citizens hope the new security force will not become a political or ineffective structure, but rather an active and reliable defense for local communities. Okigwe remains a conflict hotspot, with reports of government forces allegedly destroying properties while targeting Biafran Liberation Army commanders such as Commander Gentle the Yahoo. Innocent residents of Okigwe have lost their homes and businesses in the crossfire, raising anger and resentment in the community. Kidnapping continues to escalate nationwide, with incidents such as a busload of passengers abducted and taken into the bush, highlighting worsening insecurity. Armed robbery and banditry are on the rise, with young men increasingly resorting to crime amid weak policing and poor governance. Critics have called for peace and unity in the land, while criticizing Nigerian government failure in providing security and protecting citizens. The story unfolding in Enugu today cannot be separated from the long, painful history of the Igbo people in Nigeria. The decision by the Enugu state government to launch a new Forest Guard security outfit might appear on the surface like a local measure to curb insecurity, but in reality, it reflects deeper problems that have lingered for decades. The heart of this matter is the continuous terror inflicted by Fulani herdsmen on farming communities, particularly in the southeastern part of Nigeria. The farmers who once walked confidently into their ancestral farmlands now live in constant fear, unable to feed their families or sustain their livelihoods because of the unchecked violence by armed herders. The problem did not just spring up overnight. It has roots in the historical injustices that the Igbo nation has endured since the end of the Biafra-Nigeria Civil War in 1970. Since then, successive Nigerian governments have deliberately marginalized the Igbo people in economic opportunities, federal appointments, infrastructure development, and most importantly, in security protection. While other regions of Nigeria benefit from heavy military and police presence to protect their communities, the southeast is often left vulnerable. When the Igbo cry out for protection, what they receive instead is insolence from Abuja or even further persecution. The launch of the Forest Guards in Enugu, therefore, represents both a desperate attempt at self-defense and a loud reminder that the Nigerian government has failed woefully in its duty to protect lives. Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu, two names that have become central in the global Biafra movement, have long warned that Fulani herdsmen are not simply innocent cattle grazers, but armed militias empowered by the Nigerian state to subjugate, displace, and ultimately erase indigenous communities. Their warnings, which many once dismissed as exaggerations, now sound prophetic as more evidence piles up of villages burned, women raped, farmers slaughtered, and communities displaced. What is happening in Enugu, in Ebonyi, in Benue, and across many parts of Nigeria is part of a calculated agenda that many Biafrans believe is tied to ethnic domination and Islamization. The geographical position of Enugu makes it even more exposed. Bordering both Benue and Kogi, the state lies along a route that Fulani herders have used for decades to move their cattle. But what used to be seasonal grazing movement has transformed into a violent occupation. Farmers are confronted with AK-47 wielding herdsmen, and those who resist are attacked in their own homes. Many of the displaced are now homeless, relying on relatives or struggling in makeshift camps. The people's cry for help has often been met with indifference, and worse, the few times Nigerian soldiers have arrived, they have targeted the local youths rather than the herders carrying sophisticated weapons. It is this twisted irony that has fueled the anger of many young Biafrans and strengthened their conviction that Nigeria is a failed state for the Igbo people. The recent events in Okigwe highlight this bitter reality. Instead of pursuing the armed Fulani herdsmen terrorizing farmers, reports suggest that government forces have turned their guns on the community itself. Properties have been destroyed, shops looted, and innocent residents killed. The justification given by authorities is usually that they are searching for Biafran Liberation Army commanders, such as Commander Gentle, the Yahoo. But the real victims are often ordinary villagers who know nothing about the armed groups. To them, it feels like a double punishment. Fulani herdsmen burn their farms and kill their relatives, while Nigerian forces demolish their houses and brand them enemies of the state. It is impossible to explain this cycle without acknowledging the systematic persecution of Biafrans since the Civil War. This is why people like Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu continue to command loyalty from millions of Biafrans across the world. They are not merely political agitators, but voices speaking the truth that the people live daily. When Simon Ekpa says there is a deliberate agenda to suppress Biafrans, the people nod in agreement because their experience confirms it. When Nnamdi Kanu declares that the Igbo must rise to demand a referendum, they understand because they have endured more than 50 years of injustice. These leaders have framed the Biafra struggle not as rebellion, but as self-defense, and the events in Enugu prove their point more clearly than any speech could. The consequences of the Fulani herdsman terror go beyond individual pain. Entire communities are being emptied as people flee for safety. Food production is declining because farmers cannot plant or harvest in peace, leading to hunger and rising prices. Children are forced out of school because parents cannot afford fees after losing everything to violence. And on the national stage, the insecurity has turned Nigeria into a laughingstock. Kidnapping is now so rampant that even buses full of passengers are abducted in broad daylight and marched into the bush. Armed robbery and banditry are thriving because the security system has collapsed. Nigeria's image internationally is one of a failed state where even the government cannot guarantee the most basic function, protecting its citizens. The question is whether the Enugu Forest Guard is the solution. Citizens desperately hope so, but they also remember the failures of the past. In Nigeria, security outfits often start with fanfare only to become political tools, poorly equipped, or even infiltrated by the same criminals they were meant to fight. People fear that unless the guards are genuinely empowered, trained, and given the will to confront Fulani herdsmen, they may end up as another wasted initiative. Yet, the boldness of the Enugu government to act at all shows that local leaders are no longer waiting for Abuja's permission. They know that survival requires taking matters into their own hands. But the bigger picture remains unresolved. The Fulani herdsman problem is not an isolated crisis, but part of a national failure. The Nigerian government continues to treat armed Fulani groups with kid gloves, while movements like IPOB, which are non-violent in their core demand for a referendum, are crushed with brutal force. This double standard is not lost on the people. It convinces them further that Nigeria is not a country for all, but a system rigged against the Igbo. Until this injustice is addressed, no number of forest guards will bring lasting peace. The root cause of the problem is political exclusion, ethnic hatred, and a refusal to accept the right of Biafrans to exist freely. Solutions do exist, but they require honesty, The first is to recognize the crimes of the Fulani herdsmen and treat them as terrorists, not as sacred cows of the Nigerian state. The second is to allow Biafrans the democratic right to decide their future through a referendum. If millions of people feel they are prisoners in a country that neither protects them nor respects them, it is only fair to give them a choice. Until then, what will continue is a cycle of violence, repression, and resistance. The story of Enugu's Forest Guard launch is therefore more than a security announcement. It is a cry of survival from a people who have been pushed to the wall. It is a warning to Nigeria that the Igbo cannot continue to be sacrificed while the world watches. It is also a reminder that the struggle for Biafra is not fueled by hate, but by the desperate desire for protection, dignity, and freedom. Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu may be the faces of this struggle, but the heart of it beats in every farmer who dares not go to his land, every widow who lost her husband to Fulani bullets, every child who sleeps hungry because the farm was burned. That heart cannot be silenced by guns or prisons. It will continue to demand justice until justice is given. The crisis in Enugu today is not a sudden accident, and it did not begin with the recent wave of killings. It is a reflection of a deeper sickness in Nigeria's foundation, a sickness that the Igbo people have warned about for decades, but which successive governments have ignored. If you look back carefully, you will see a pattern that runs through every major conflict in the southeast since 1967. The Nigerian state has always chosen force over dialogue, punishment over understanding, and exclusion over inclusion. When the Civil War ended in 1970, General Yakubu Gowon declared the famous phrase, "No victor, no vanquished." But in truth, that declaration was only on paper. In practice, the Igbo people were treated as a conquered people. Their wealth was seized, their bank accounts reduced to a mere £20 regardless of what they had before the war, their opportunities cut off in government and military service, and their voices silenced in the corridors of power. That wound never healed, and every generation since then has carried the burden of marginalization. Fast forward to today, and we see that same pattern in the way the Nigerian government treats the issue of Fulani herdsmen. For years, reports of killings in Enugu, Ebonyi, Benue, Plateau, and other states have circulated. Villages have been burned, women raped, children slaughtered, and yet Abuja remains silent. When the Igbo people form vigilante groups or defend themselves, suddenly the government springs into action, sending soldiers, helicopters, and armored vehicles. This hypocrisy is too obvious to deny. The Fulani herdsmen are treated like sacred children of the state, while the Igbo are treated like disposable citizens. The Enugu government's launch of a forest guard is therefore both an act of bravery and an act of necessity. People cannot continue to sit back while their homes are raided and their farmlands destroyed. Governor Peter Mbah has taken a bold step, but the question many are asking is, will this guard be allowed to function without interference from Abuja? Or will they face the same fate as other local initiatives that were deliberately crippled by the federal government? Time will tell, but what is clear is that the people no longer have the luxury of waiting. To understand the anger boiling in the southeast, you must listen to the voices of ordinary villagers. Imagine a farmer in Nkanu who wakes up at dawn to prepare his hoe and machete for the farm. He walks for hours, only to find strange men in his land with cattle grazing on his crops. When he protests, they threaten him with AK-47 rifles. If he dares to resist, he is killed, and his family is left to bury him in silence. When his community cries out to the police, they are told to maintain peace and avoid taking the law into their hands. But what law protects them? What peace is there in hunger and fear? The people's cry is simple. If the Nigerian government will not defend us, then we will defend ourselves. That is the spirit behind the forest guards. Simon Ekpa has spoken about this countless times. In his broadcasts from Finland, he has accused the Nigerian state of deliberate negligence, calling the Fulani herdsmen a state-sponsored terror group. He argues that their mission is not just grazing cattle, but occupying indigenous lands and spreading fear until the owners are forced to flee. Nnamdi Kanu from detention has also emphasized the same point, that the Igbo are under siege, and only a determined struggle for Biafra can guarantee their survival. Both men have been vilified by the Nigerian state and accused of inciting violence. but their message resonates because it mirrors the reality on the ground. The events in Okigwe stand as a painful reminder of how misplaced the Nigerian government's priorities are. Rather than confronting Fulani herders who roam freely with weapons, the army often invades Igbo communities under the pretext of hunting down Biafran fighters. In one sweep, shops are destroyed, houses set ablaze, and people arrested. Mothers weep for their missing sons, fathers lament their ruined businesses, and children are traumatized for life. In this chaos, the herdsmen return at night to continue their killings, confident that no one will stop them. It is this double oppression, from Fulani herdsmen on one side and Nigerian security forces on the other, that has pushed Biafrans to the breaking point. And when people say the struggle for Biafra is a cry for justice, it is not an exaggeration. It is the only logical response to a system that has consistently failed them. The consequences of ignoring this truth are already visible. Food insecurity is spreading because farmers cannot produce enough. Families that once depended on agriculture are falling into poverty. Young men, seeing no future, are turning to crime, armored robbery, kidnapping, and banditry. The Nigerian government then uses these crimes as further justification to unleash more military raids. But they never admit that the insecurity is their own creation. It is a vicious cycle, and until the root causes are addressed, it will not end. There is also a broader political dimension to this crisis. The Nigerian government continues to push the narrative of one Nigeria, but the reality is that the country is more divided today than at any time since the Civil War. The Fulani political elite hold power at the center and protect their own, while other regions are left to fend for themselves. This imbalance of power makes genuine reform almost impossible. For the Igbo, the only way out is either true federalism that grants them control over their security and resources, or outright independence through Biafra. Anything less will only prolong the suffering. The forest guards in Enugu, therefore, represent more than just a security initiative. They are a symbol of resistance, a declaration that the Igbo people will not sit idle while their land is taken. They are also a test case. If the guards succeed, other southeastern states will follow. If they fail, it will only confirm the people's belief that Nigeria is beyond repair. Some critics argue that creating local security outfits might provoke more violence. But that argument ignores the reality that violence already exists. The people are already dying, already losing their lands, already fleeing their homes. Doing nothing is no longer an option. Even if the guards face challenges, they are better than silence and helplessness. Solutions to this crisis must be bold and honest. One path is to recognize the rights of indigenous communities to defend themselves. Another is to stop shielding Fulani herdsmen and instead designate them as terrorists, which is what they are. But the ultimate solution, the one that people like Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu insist upon, is a referendum. If millions of people no longer feel safe or welcome in Nigeria, then it is only just to let them decide their own future. Denying them that right will only deepen the conflict. Internationally, the world is beginning to take notice. Human rights groups have documented the atrocities of Fulani herdsmen and the brutality of Nigerian forces in the southeast. But governments, especially in the West, remain reluctant to act because of Nigeria's oil wealth and geopolitical importance. Yet history shows that injustice cannot last forever. Just as apartheid crumbled in South Africa, the oppression of Biafrans will one day face its reckoning. The question is, how many more lives must be lost before that day comes? For now, the people of Enugu place their cautious hopes in the forest guards. They know that real change cannot come from Abuja, but must come from their own determination. Whether or not the guards succeed, the message has been sent. The Igbo will not surrender their land without a fight. And this brings us to the heart of the matter. The struggle for Biafra is not about hate for other tribes. It is about survival, dignity, and justice. It is about the right of a people to live without fear, to farm their land without being shot, to walk their streets without being arrested, to raise their children without trauma. These are basic human rights, yet for the Igbo in Nigeria, they remain a daily battle. Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu have given voice to this battle, but the voice itself belongs to every Biafran. The Enugu Forest Guard is one more step in a long journey, a journey that began with the blood of millions in the Civil War and continues today with the cries of widows and orphans. The Nigerian government may try to silence that voice with guns and prisons, but history shows that truth always outlives oppression. In the end, the story of Enugu's bold move will be remembered not just for the guards it created, but for the spirit it symbolizes. It will be remembered as the moment when a people refused to remain victims and chose to stand for themselves. It will be remembered as another chapter in the ongoing struggle for Biafra, a struggle rooted in history, sharpened by injustice, and driven by the unbreakable will of a people who refuse to die. The outro of this story is simple yet powerful. The Igbo have suffered too long, and their patience has worn thin. The launch of the Enugu Forest Guard is not just about protecting farms. It is about protecting a nation within a nation. It is about drawing a line in the sand and saying, enough is enough. It is about telling the world that Biafra is not a dream of the past, but the demand of the present. And as long as people like Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu continue to speak, and as long as ordinary villagers continue to resist, the cry for Biafra will never be silenced. That cry is growing louder in Enugu today, carried by the new forest guards, echoed in the fields of displaced farmers, and written in the blood of the innocent. One day, the world will listen. One day, justice will come. And when that day arrives, the story of Enugu's bold move will be remembered as a small spark in the fire of freedom.
Go downstairs, come back. On our way now? Yes, sir. Hey, let's go. Odopa. Look up like where mood take inside this one. There, okay. Mood enter inside this one. Maybe there is a system in there. There's no password. Are you sure? I like to take inside. If you go, all you want to okay. Huh? That's why I want to do something also. This can be work. 24th of on Sunday we did bush. I say on Sunday we did bush. There's the road here. We can make it come here. But I need to very fast. But it's blocked. It's blocked. Okay, who come block that? I need to block her. There's a road here too now. Come. Who get us there? No, it's not far. Light, take it down. Bring that light, come check this thing for me. Come check what's in the cover there. Take my camera, go there. With the light down. Video no, now wait. Move that stone. Maybe the girl is gone there. Move on. Wait, light down inside. Okay. Light down inside, sir. Like it. Go to the entire. Go to the entire. Who touched there? Go with the story. That place. Okay, wait. Look on. Flash it.